where we are, and that's where we continue to focus our energies moving into the new year. The hope is that in this new year, we're back in person doing our very best work, and that happening as soon as we possibly can have that happen. So that's sort of where we are right now at this point in the year. Marianne's joining us now. Hi, Marianne.
Hi. Sorry I'm late.
No worries. We're just we finished up Mission Moment, talking through School Leader Report with just a couple of underlining areas. I want to move on to page 3 of that School Leader Report and just highlight Safe Centers for Online Learning, our POD program, which did kick off at the middle school last week, middle school yesterday, and our high school last week. And so we've got about 15 students right now taking part in that, close to 20, and engaging in remote schooling from our school building in socially distanced, safe classrooms that are monitored. Two proctors are alumni of ours, as well as some after-school partners who we've worked with in the past. And so it's off the ground and feels good. And so now the work is in expanding that program and having more kids benefit from it as much as possible. And so that's where we are, brand new, fresh, a week and a half. Beyond that, I'll say a bit about fundraising just for the month of December. We did raise just over $10,000 with, I think, a few checks still coming in. So that feels really good in closing out the year. And so I'll say a bit more about that in a moment when we get to the dashboard, but I just want to thank folks for chipping in and for contributing to school as we close out the year. That's all that I have. Are there any specific questions people have regarding other areas of the report?
Okay, great. Should we move on to the dashboard?
Yeah, let's do that. So I now have the dashboard in hand, and there are maybe 4 or so updates or highlights I want to provide there for the month of January. And so I think the first is table 1 with enrollment. And so right now, just to give you headlines, we're up 1 over the last month enrollment-wise at 533. The utilization rate ranges across grades from 78% our 6th grade to 103% in our 12th grade overall, 94%. 9th grade, by far the biggest cohort we have at 98 students. And so the work right now is in continuing to make efforts to backfill as we see fit, particularly in the 6th and 10th grade, as well as now move on, as Chris presented last week, move on to recruiting for the 2021-22 school year. And so that's the latest on enrollment and moves forward at this point in time. Beyond that, I want to move on to table 3, another update for this month, which is a table that summarizes student attrition. And so our target each year is typically about 10%. We want to see that no more than 10% of our students are kind of leaving or withdrawing from our school. And that's a health kind of measure, so to speak, of families being happy and satisfied with our program. At this point in the year, we're just about at the midway mark. And so we are at 1.88%. Jake, I'm looking at your background and wondering if you're at the new Moynihan Center. Is that what that is?
that is the background. As somebody said in an earlier call, there's so few commuters these days, you might not know if I was actually there, but no, I'm not there.
I saw pictures today. I thought I've seen that before. Very nice. So attrition is in very sort of good standing right now. We look for that to continue with thus far 10 students moving on. And you can see the reasons in the table for students moving on. A couple moving out of state, a couple who saw programs that were more enticing to them elsewhere, a couple of students in the upper grades moving on to settings that would allow for them to gain credits at a faster pace than what they gain at our school, etc. So that's the update on student attrition. Any questions there? Great, I'll move us forward to table 7, which is a summary of student recruitment. And so what you focus on here are just the number of students, number of applications that we're getting each month. And overall, in the 6th grade and 9th grade are 2 main sort of entry grades as well as in the other grades, just to build up a healthy wait list if seats open up. And so right now we're at 32 and 54 in the 6th and 9th grade respectively. That is behind where we've been in the past. I'll have better data next meeting on where we were last year versus this year. It's helpful. The main reason for that is we just didn't and couldn't participate in any in-person fairs in the fall, which is typically a big draw for applications and in meeting people. And so we're working against that this year. And as Chris presented out last month, we've got a plan for doing so. And so I'll provide additional updates in the coming month. In terms of targets right now, you'll see that in the takeaways section of the table. A milestone for us right now by the February break, which is around the 18th of February, is to have 100 6th grade applications and 150 9th grade applications in hand. So that's what we're aiming for. Question with recruitment.
It looks like there's a bit of attrition on the 11th and 12th grade from current year in terms of, I guess, the anticipated number of returning students. It's not crazy, but it seems high for that late in sort of the academic career. Anything particular going on there?
So when I look at target enrollment for the 12th grade, I see it at 55, and then I see it at 65 and then moving to 56. I
guess I'm looking more at that we're at 57 and 56 for the anticipated, and I think we're currently at 63 and 61.
Yeah, I think it could be. I think we're still kind of young with those grades. We haven't experienced a whole lot of like historical years, and so I think our first couple of years, and some of that was due to just moving into a new building, et cetera, there was perhaps more attrition, and so we're basing it on that. But I do believe like that should steady out. In fact, when looking at our 12th grade enrollment this year versus what we anticipated, we're at 103% on table 1. We're at 102%. So it seems to be that like while we've made some assumptions based on historical observations, things are steadying out. We're not seeing a sort of attrition in our most prior year compared to other years.
Got it.
So last table, just development-wise, and so I mentioned that about $10,000 were donated to the school this past month. Year to date, we're at about $12,000. That doesn't include a small campaign that Sal ran back in November, which is another $4,000 or so, another 35 donations. Donation-wise, we're at 17, not including that 35 coming from Sal. The goal there is 150, and so I think once that 35 comes in through the Facebook campaign, we're beginning to kind of see something closer to our target. And then with regard to donations or the average donation, I think this is sort of interesting. It's close to $700 per donation, which is a very substantial amount when thinking about it. And so I look at this and say, there may be some opportunity for some small campaigns among kind of more modest donors and donations. So that's where things stand at this point. Maybe one other update is that I have been in touch with members of the associate board to update our website and the way in which we, in a systematic way, engage in small campaigns, small sort of like very directed campaigns. For example, we're starting a literary magazine at our high school. We need $5,000 to do it. This is what the $5,000 will pay for. Get this out in social media and have a bunch of success in that, both with Sal and associate board's efforts in the past, and want to make that easier to do both for school and for those who are volunteering their time and their contacts. So look forward to having another update on that soon, but I'm actually borrowing this idea from a nonprofit we fund back in December as a school, and they are a few steps ahead of us with regard to that. So we're following their footsteps and stealing some good ideas from them. Development. So those are the updates. Any updates or any questions more generally with the dashboard this month? Great. So I think, Jim, that dashboard.
Josh, based on our conversation yesterday, do you want to do the strategic part as part of the SLC, those slides?
I still see later
Do we
on.
need those? Do we need to pull up those slides?
Yeah, I'm going to pull
Okay, off you go.
back to share screen. And let's go to under. Okay, and let's go to strategic planning. And then let's go to this here. Actually, let's go to this here. All right, can you all see a document called Vision for Unity Prep, Charter School Brooklyn on your screens? No. All right.
I think if you stop share screen and then start again, there you go.
Let's do that.
It's a constant irritant for me too when I'm doing the screen sharing.
The 1.0 version of a lot of these technologies, they'll get better quickly. All right, so what I want to do this portion of the meeting is talk strategy. We haven't done this for some time in a formal way. If you recall, back in September of 2019, I kind of put forward some big ideas on school and vision using some background resources, and that's what you see before you now. Since then, we've devoted most of our strategic planning to thinking about how we work school through a pandemic. And so what I want to do today is revisit where we were as of September of 2019. It's a slightly updated version of that. And then move into some zooming out over the next 5 years and talking about some ideas, some big ideas for school and what we could accomplish over the next 5 years between now and 2026. The reason for doing this now is really threefold. I think one, it's kind of the new year, and this is the thing to do at this time of the year is think big about ideas. Second, we've been exploring the possibility of making some big decisions about our high school building, and so it's good to kind of get a big picture view of everything on the table and how those decisions may influence others. And then finally, we've got some new members here tonight, and so Dr. Adams, you're here, and so I figure this is kind of helpful to you to get some context on school and where we go. So in backing up and in thinking big picture about vision, we start with our core values as a school, and those are listed in front of you. Education is the great equalizer, and so we take pride in providing for all of our kids the best possible experience educationally. In doing that, excellent teaching is sort of our main method for providing such an education to our kids so that they have every experience that any other kid does in the world. And so that being something that I think we feel is paramount to creating an educational experience for kids. Third, and I should say like core values here are things that we believe in as a school that are steadfast. They don't change. And so other things here that are important in driving kind of the work that we do is that growth is most important, and growth yields proficiency in what kids gather from school. And so our task is to meet every one of our kids where they're at and help them along so that they're having every door open to them once they graduate from our school. And then finally, it's about kind of a well-rounded experience and making sure that every one of our kids is experiencing an ample dose of co-curriculars over time, so they're finding their passions, as well as like teaching into character. So kids are living out some of those values that are valuable to the world, to their families, their communities, etc. So that's where we begin with our core values. In terms of purpose as a school, moving on to the next sort of section, that's very much like our mission, and it's sort of like why we exist. And that for us is to provide all of our students with an exceptional educational experience that empowers them to lead fulfilling lives. And so moving on from that core purpose as a school, why we exist, our core strategy is the main lever we use to then see that purpose through. And for us, it's about people. And it's about prioritizing the investment of time, money, hearts, hands, minds to like human capital skill and making sure that we've got really good people working with our kids each and every day. Leaders, staff, teachers, faculty, everyone. And so that like many institutions, is the way in which we do our best work. The next area, and again, I'm kind of adapting this from some resources I've used in the past, are BHAG, B-H-A-G, is just our big, hairy, ambitious goal as a school. And that is something that we aspire to obtain over, it may be decades, but it's like what we're aiming toward in the end if we reach our kind of best selves. And for us, that is to become the best open enrollment, independent mom and pop charter school in the US. And that being evidenced through our students and their growth and opportunities after leaving our school. So the envision future, the last part of this, which rounds out kind of like our vision as a school, is what we see happening and living out through this good work. And first and foremost with this, if we do this well, our kids are graduating from our school and have the skills, the knowledge, the experiences, and the mindset to pursue post-secondary studies successfully, to obtain gainful employment in the field of their choosing, and to actively and positively contribute to their communities. And that makes us proud. That's what we aim toward, and that's success in our minds. In doing that, in addition to that, as a school, our envisioned future includes our staff being among the best in terms of like the way in which they then see kids growing over time, and being able to seek out those aspirations that are passionate for them. Beyond that, the offerings that we give must be well-rounded. And so for us, it's about making sure our kids, again, have ample doses of co-curriculars and are experiencing a character education program that is allowing for them to learn over time, learn from the mistakes, learn from peers, etc. And I think through that, with all of those things in the mix, we're creating an opportunity and experience, a school, a model for our community that is worthy of pride. And so that's the general aim, and that's our vision as a school. With that, I now want to move on to, and I'm going to have to close out and open back up. Fool me once. And what I want to do is move on to some big ideas for the next 5 years. And so let's see, what I need to do is, give me 1 second. Slides. There they are. So this was discussed with the SLC earlier this week, and then I had a chance to talk through it with Jim this morning. So I appreciate some of the feedback received during those conversations. But what I want to do now is talk through some big initiatives that I think would allow for us to sort of live out our core purpose and realize our big, hairy, ambitious goal over time. And so as I do that, what I'd like to ask of you is to think about the following. As I provide you with some of the initiatives at play that I think allow for us to sort of see that purpose through, think about which of these is most compelling to you as we move forward. And if there are things that you feel are missing that are worthy of being considered for like some of the initiatives we take part in, please flag those, and we'll circle back toward the end of this. So there are 3 general categories that I think these initiatives fit under. The first is about product, what it is we're providing to our stakeholders, our families and kids. And in my mind, it's about Unity being a model career and college prep school for all of New York City. Second, it's about talent. It's about the people in the building doing the good work. And so for me, in 5 years, the aim is that Unity is the top choice among top educators, and that we're building our institutional skills to attract, hire, develop, and retain top talent. Finally, it's about scale and the idea here is that Unity has an increased scale on education in New York City and beyond as a mom and pop, as a single school, but the way in which we perhaps impact other schools, other students, that's happening more so than it is now through some initiatives, which I'll get into in a moment. So I'm going to move on first to product and say a bit more about that. And what I've listed out here.
Josh, before you do that, can we just go back to the prior slide for a second? Yeah. I think number one, okay, I understand that. Mm-hmm. Number two, I think is sort of in service of number one, but is this too narrowly defined? I mean, are you talking just about teaching staff, or are you talking about everybody who's running the school? So I think that there's nothing in here about operations and for example, the teachers are not in charge of enrollment. And so I know I sound like a broken record, but where's enrollment in here?
Yeah, no, I use the word educators to encompass all people working on our building.
Okay.
And so that's this distinction. If I say teachers, I'm referring to only teachers. Educators, everyone has a responsibility in providing a solid education to each one of our kids.
Okay, and how do you think about sort of development and fundraising? Am I going to see some of that in the next slides? Are they going to sub goals within those, or are they not things that you judge yourself on?
I think they are, but I would say they're probably the 2.0 version of this, where this is just kind of like some big ideas, like, hey, let me put them out there and give you some kind of bigger headlines. And then I think as we work plan this out or come up with like some concrete ways of seeing these through, I think those sort of sub bullets, resource needs, etc., show up. So I think for today, it's a bit more general than that, although they may show up here and there. And I think it's a worthy question toward the end. Like if you came to me and said, hey, all right, Josh, this is cool. What do you need to make this happen? Then we start talking about resources and whether those resources are in the cards or not.
Yeah, I guess understanding all this, my only off-the-cuff comment, and we can go through, is that I would have expected number one to be more than a majority of your goals.
So yeah, no, good point. I think what I've got here is and Jim had a similar question this morning, but I think if you look at the percentages after each one of these sort of big bins, 40, 40, 20, like those really to me reflect the amount of time and attention that has to go into each of these to sort of see our core purpose through. So product, 40% of our time, talent, 40% of our time, scale, 20% of our time. And those are rough. Maybe it's 50, 40, 10. But what I'm trying
Why isn't product 90%?
Important. What's that?
Why isn't product 90%? Isn't that the core mission, is educating kids? And
yeah. So I think as we get into like what I'm defining each as within kind of like some of these sub areas.
Yeah, which we can go through. That's fine.
And then I think the larger point here is in my mind, and I think I've learned this over the past 8 years, and so I believe this more so now than I ever have, is that talent drives everything in a school because it's so service oriented and about connections and interactions and skill. And so in my mind, they've got to be equal. You've got to have a good product, like a good curriculum, and then you've got to have really terrific people who can deliver that curriculum with conviction and effectively. If you don't have that latter part, the curriculum is just useless. So that's what I'm trying to convey here, is like so much of this is about talent.
Are you trying to turn it? Oh, it's broken.
So I don't want to belabor this first slide too much, but I think you made an interesting distinction there between curriculum and, at least the way I read one.
Yeah.
And I think that makes more sense. Like to me, the product is the output. What you got listed as products is sort of like the great school, which to me that's the output, and the inputs are curriculum and talent. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, let me think about how that might be conveyed more clearly with kind of input as the focus here. Noted. in thinking about like the main ingredients for me for like Unity becoming a model career and college prep school, the first gets to curriculum, and curriculum includes assessment, it includes units, it includes lesson plans themselves. But for us, now that we're a full 6 through 12 school and have experienced advanced placement classes at our school, the work is in continuing to align what kids experience in 6th grade to 7th grade to 8th grade to 9th grade to 10th grade to 11th grade to 12th grade in a seamless way, where the baton can be passed from one teacher to the next, the skills are connected, and by the time kids graduate from school, they've experienced a college-like setting that allows for them to step onto a college campus without fear, with confidence, and engage. So that's the work that needs to happen, and it's placed one on this list because I think it is the most important when thinking about these initiatives here, and what goes into our core purpose being realized. Other things here I think are also important. And so one subset of having a really great curriculum, 6 through 12, is around an initiative that we're looking at now around our math curriculum, and wanting to look to see what's out there with regard to formal packaged curriculum that's good, that's been vetted, that we might be able to adopt and then facilitate in our classes, as opposed to continuing to sort of create from within. And I think over time we've learned that like that requires a whole lot of attention and time, and it might be better suited to have something presented to us that we can adapt, and then we're spending more of our time in how we adapt it and deliver it. So these are things that we've experienced over the past couple of years that I think would allow for us to improve our product, the experience kids have in school, academically first and foremost on this list. Other things that got mentioned here are around completing that education. And this goes back to one of the core beliefs of the school about like an education having to include experiences for kids that move beyond the liberal arts and sciences, and also encompass just activities, co-curriculars, sports, clubs, experiences, volunteer opportunities. And so we have a hodgepodge of that, grades 6 through 12, but we haven't been super strategic in how we align our electives, our arts and performing arts, our extracurriculars. And I think the benefit here is that we have had some kids who are mighty talented. And in our first go with our first class, there were some kids that perhaps could have had a college scholarship or moved on and done something at the college level in an extracurricular. But our programs weren't developed and not aligned. So I think there's some importance here to seeing kind of like kids experience or be exposed to the arts and co-curriculars initially, and then be able to specialize in them and excel in them as they move on through school. Other initiatives here, there's some promise with tutoring, right? We've seen some promise, I think, at our high school and middle school. I'd like to see something built out further. We've never really seen this through as a school, and I do feel as if there's a critical mass of students who need additional help beyond the walls of our school, and this might be something that offers it to them. Research-wise, there's some good stuff out there with regard to the effectiveness of tutoring on student outcomes. And then beyond that, going back to like the full student, being better at helping kids work through adversity, work through decisions that maybe weren't in their best interest at first, and learn from them authentically, I think benefits kids in the long run and benefits the way in which they view the world and work with others. And so that's 1.6 around the effective use of various restorative practices in the school that help kids authentically learn from experiences and move forward. And then beyond that, I think in the same vein, it's about empowering kids and providing opportunities of leadership that I think benefit them as they move beyond the walls of our school and look for opportunities for leadership thereafter. And so kids experiencing this over 7 years, but over the next 5 years, us developing them out, I think is really good for us as a school and seeing our program through. Moving on to talent, and Unity being a top choice among top educators, there are a few things that need to happen here. And I think what I've also seen over the past 2 or 3 years and learned more so is that like leadership matters. And the work of our principals, the work that I do at the school, the work of department chairs really does improve practices in classrooms, support it, push it forward, etc. And so within our little old mom and pop school, like continuing to sharpen the skills of our leaders to develop others is, to me, one of the most important things on this list that helps students learn more through the experience at our school. One of the means of that is the way in which we do walkthroughs. I'm going to talk about inviting you along on that experience in the coming month, shortly later on in this meeting. But I love the idea of leaders in schools doing rounds, looking in classrooms, thinking critically about what's going well and what is not, and then thinking about ways to improve things in the moment or shortly thereafter. And so we're beginning to kind of see some progress with this use in our school. Again, you'll be able to experience it soon, but I see that being one of our main tools for seeing improvements and enhancements in classrooms. Beyond that, these last items, 2.3 through 2.5, are really about pipeline stuff and like keeping talent in-house. And so it's about, for us, we've got some pretty good systems for like celebrating teachers and their growth over time. I want to continue to see that through like our formal promotion and clear career ladder methods at the school. In addition, I think we benefit from having more people early on in their career before we give them the keys to our classroom and have them fully teaching, working in our school and getting a sense of what we do as a school through fellowship programs, both for leaders and teachers. And then finally, I think we do a pretty good job at this, but I think there's some enhancements based on feedback over the past couple of years about the way in which we make our benefits program even more competitive with some of our peers. And so I see some gains in that, and I see that translating to top talent staying with us longer than they might otherwise. So that's talent to me. Final bit here around scale. And this, again, are the ways in which we might impact education or other students, other schools in ways that don't require us to be more than a single mom and pop school. And so for me, expanding our school downward and moving on to a K through 5 model, pre-K to 5, I think allows for us to benefit more kids and families. There's been more demand for that recently. There's some work to do here, but I see promise in this, both from being able to impact more families and kids from an outcome perspective, where more of our kids are entering our 6th grade at grade level academically, and from a recruitment level where more kids know of our school as of 5th grade and are seamlessly moving into our 6th grade as a result. In addition to that, I think we're able to benefit more kids at the high school if we expand things out by a bit. And so this may add 30 to 40 seats at our school and have more students experiencing our high school, and then which then allows for us to perhaps expand our course offerings in some ways that benefit kids. Beyond that, as we continue to grow, we're going to have 2 cohorts in college next year, 3 the year after that, 4 the year after that, and so on and so forth. So building out our alumni counseling program, which has been a more recent best practice across a lot of charters over the past decade or so, is something that we also feel we want to be strong in, is we want to see kids fully supported as they engage in post-secondary studies. And then finally, beyond that, and this is kind of a long-term idea that I think is intriguing, is some sort of educational research offshoot. And so ways in which we're kind of thinking big and broadly about school and what it could be, and piloting those sorts of ideas in our school to benefit our kids, our school, and then if those pilots become promising, sharing it out with other schools. So that's the suite of big ideas that I believe are very much in the cards over the coming 5 years, 5 to 10 years, as we think about what could be and think about how we get better at what we do. They're listed here. I think the question I posed that earlier on was twofold. First, what is most compelling in your mind as you kind of look at these? What would you underline and say, yeah, this is the thing that we really got to focus on as a school in order to sort of see this core purpose of being an exceptional school for our kids that allows for them to lead fulfilling lives. And then if there are things that you feel are missing or not represented here, I'd love to hear those as well. So I'm going to shut up because I've been talking, it feels like, for 30 minutes. And and listen. Like what comes to mind for people here? And I'd love to hear from everyone on the call today, just because I think it's important for norming purposes to kind of hear what ideas people have and hear
I'm very
what priorities people believe are most important.
Oh, that's interesting.
I would say, this is Madonna speaking. For me, would definitely be the building the teacher development. I mean, of course, I would say this, right? Like the teacher development, as well as the curriculum. I feel like that's the higher view areas to focus on, and then everything else kind of falls within that umbrella.
Is there anything here that you feel is or anything that's not here that perhaps should be here, Dr. Adams?
In terms of the bullet points, or the entire like the actual focus?
I think the bullet points, but if there's something there around actual focus that you feel is important to lift out, I'm all ears.
Yeah, I mean, nothing, I wouldn't say nothing else stands out in terms of the actual focus for the curriculum, but this is just something in terms of like getting more specific, right? And so I do think it's important to find a curriculum that makes is rigorous, that prepares students for college and careers, but even looking more specifically around the training of how to implement that curriculum. So of course, I would assume that you're looking for a curriculum that teaches students concepts, right, and builds their conceptual understanding. But then what is the training that's paired with that for the teachers in order to implement that effectively?
Right.
Can I add a couple things, Josh? And I know I've talked already, but I think would be helpful for me, at least, to see is sort of what do we think we've accomplished in the past 8 years or however long it's been, and where do we think we've fallen short, and how and why do we think that's the case, and how do the goals we're putting on the page now correspond to our successes and our shortcomings? Because I think I don't disagree with any of what's on the page. I think I might have taken a different view, as I said, of the weighting, and I think there's some first order goals and some second order goals, and I think what you have in the third bucket generally are kind of aspirational. I think one, two in service of one are very important and key and sort of immediate, and things that need to have been done, arguably years ago. I think three is, I think you need to satisfy one in order to be able to do three. Right? If you're not successful in educating the kids you already have, there's not going to be a lot of sympathy for you to start educating kids in lower grades. I don't think there's going to be a lot of sympathy from the board to focus on, space expansion or things like that if we're not doing well at our core mission. The counseling, I think, is a different story, but the research, I think people are going to want to hear about us if we have something compelling, right, to offer. And if we can tell them this is what we've done, this is how we've done it, maybe differently from others, and this is what's worked that other people maybe haven't been doing. So I still kind of go back to the same point that, maybe as reformulated the way Jake suggested, everything is in service of one, and sort of one comes as the key goal. But just because I'm being long-winded, I think my 2 points are, I would like to see not just forward-looking, but a kind of clear-eyed assessment of how we've done on equivalent metrics for as long as we've been around, and then maybe kind of some prioritizing among everything you have on the page.
Yeah, I think what do you feel we've accomplished? Where have we fallen short and why? That allows for you to see very clearly why these might be very reasonably and logically the answers that allow for us to advance without hesitation.
Yeah, and I mean, just to be somewhat blunt, right? I think we're not going to call ourselves successful in 2026 until we have great student achievement numbers, right?
Yeah, I think there's a longer conversation there, and like I'm a long game person when it comes to kids, and so I look at some of the stats in the long term, and there's a reason to be pleased with our first go at this. And I think what's also hard, and it's not an excuse, it's just the hard work, but it's the right work, is that convincing people that we're doing good work in the right way and serving all students, I think is something that I've hit a wall on, because I believe that, and I do believe that that hasn't always been the case among charters in New York City, and perhaps wasn't the case. So I have a hard time, like, how do we kind of get there? And it's not as if we don't have a lot of work to do, but I think doing the good work the right way, the harder way, often is often doesn't get you maybe the credit that you deserve. And I think sometimes I feel as if we're in that boat because we're trying to make sure that we're serving all kids.
Understood. And I think you have your board's support in doing it and doing it the right way. But I think we still need to hold ourselves to high standards in doing that, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. Other thoughts here?
No, I'd agree with that. I think in terms of prioritizing, we have to tackle one before we can tackle three. So I don't know if, in addition to some of the work that Marion laid out, it also makes sense to sort of think about when in the 5-year period some of these might become priorities. You know, I think some of the things in bucket number 3, maybe you start to allocate more resources to midway through that 5-year period if 2021 and 2022 look really good from an assessment, and recruitment and other perspectives, so that you're not diverting your attention and your focus from the really important things in bucket number 1 that, need to be the top priority.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is like timelining this out and prioritizing by that timeline is helpful.
I think my comments are probably most similar to Marion, where it's not a list of objectives so much as like a pyramid. And there's like a lot of core basic education stuff that I'm not sure that like we're, providing the kids with. And then we're maybe a little, I guess I push back a little bit on the focusing solely on progress as a metric, as opposed to like hitting some serious absolute levels, because I think it's just too gradual and incremental from the low baseline that we're starting at. And I hear you that there's like plenty of charter schools that cherry pick, but I guess to me, I still am somewhat convinced that our scores are a little bit indicative of that there's instructional weakness in the classroom.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the other idea that comes up through this conversation, which I think is a good one, is just like clarity of outcomes here and what outcomes are most important. And when I think about outcomes, we're still really new to like a high school scene, but to me, it's still that long game and what happens at the end. How many of your kids are graduating from high school? How many of those kids are moving on to college? And then maybe just before that, how many kids are obtaining, I'll say it, just like AP college credit, or like doing well on the Regents exams to then be able to get into the CUNY or SUNY and be successful. Like those to me are the goals that I prioritize. And that to me is more important than, for example, a 6th grade ELA proficiency score. And so I think maybe what I do is kind of put that forward like as a next step, in addition to some of these things, like, hey, here are the outcomes that I think are most important given our core purpose as a school. And like, let's spar, kind of disagree where we need to, but let's figure out where there's also a lot of overlap, and then push one another to kind of get clarity collectively as a group on what it is that we're aiming for, so that we can move forward with some of these things fully normed.
I guess my problem with that is I feel like that's too long a feedback cycle to look at, how kids do in college and graduating from college. Like, if they're not reading at a reasonable grade level in 6th grade, to me, we need to, there's a reasonable chance that that's a good predictor that they're not going to end up where they need to be at the end of the road also.
So we're close there. Like, I just look at 8th grade because we start in 6th grade. I tend to then look at 8th grade and say, all right, all of our kids should be reading at Z level, which is a high school reading level by the time they graduate. And typically it's about 70% of our kids. And so we still have a way to go. Like, that's what you said too. And I think you're right. And I think instructionally, that's where we need to like devote more time to get there. That's the only thing that's going to get us there. So I think we're saying the same things with maybe different angles, but there's a lot of agreement.
So I guess I would add in this plan some of those, in sort of tech companies parlance, they call them like key results, but some sort of steps along the way that we want to make sure we're hitting and that, are setting us up for those long-term objective goals as well.
Yeah.
I guess I'm surprised to hear that our literacy is that high. That seems higher than our proficiency scores.
I mean, there is a direct correlation, but it's not one-to-one with state 8th grade exams in ELA and Fontes and Pinnell reading levels.
Okay.
One thing I was, in terms of just thinking through, number 2 says Unity is a top choice among top educators. What if you rewrote number 1 to say Unity is the top choice among potential students? And you really kind of reframe the conversation that way. And because wouldn't you know if you succeeded if we had a long waiting list in 6th grade? You kind of know. You don't have to guess anymore. Waiting lists across the board. And would you change anything if that was the only goal you had for the next year or 3 years or whatever?
That's interesting.
What would the parents say? If you did these things, it might look a lot like this list. I don't know, but what if you just kind of reset your mind around that?
So in implicitly, I think it would, and I think maybe some of my ideas are driven with that focus, but it's not stated explicitly. So I kind of need to check myself to see if these initiatives would be the ones that I think are most important to having this be the most sought after middle school, high school in the city based on applications, something like that.
Yeah, I just wonder what it would look like, how different it would be in terms of your priorities, in terms of how you think about these moving parts here, if that was the only thing you cared about. We are the most attractive school for the kids in our area.
Interesting, yeah.
Anyway, think about it.
Like 5 seconds of looking down this list is like, I think this hits it. I'm looking at number 1, but there may be something missing. Let me do some more thinking. Other folks, if you haven't had a chance to share out, I would love to hear your thoughts.
One thought on Jake's idea about the key performance indicators. I think consistency should be part of that. I think we have years where, this grade does really well, and then this grade has a very off year, 7th grade for some reason. And so I think as part of it, it shouldn't just be, we hit 80% and we're good. It should be, we need to get to a cycle where we're consistently, hitting whatever your key metrics are.
Mm-hmm. Jeanette, when I think of that and think about the sort of why, I immediately move to number 2 in the list and begin thinking about, so if we're talking about math in the 7th grade, for example, the key players there are the co-principal teaching and learning, the math chair, and the math teachers. They drive most of what kids learn there. And then there's a dean of students who also then kind of ensures the kids are happy, safe, positive, etc. And that That's the experience that kids have in that math classroom. That in compilation with the curriculum itself. And so if the curriculum is constant, but outcomes change each year, it's really about the people and the talent in that space. And I in the past 8 years have seen more correlation to like changes in staffing and then outcomes, which is why I tend to put more emphasis on talent being the thing. Perhaps more than what others have kind of thought through today in hearing.
I think Jeanette makes a really interesting point, which I think ties to your response to Josh.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the outcome in any given year should be dependent on one individual. I think it's very important to be able to recruit the right individuals, but you need to have room for error in your system too. You need to be able to run the school if you recruit somebody who turns out not to have been the best fit. I think we need an institution that functions to some extent regardless of the every single individual. It can't be the requirement that you have to get every single recruiting decision 100% right in order for achievement to follow.
When I think about that, I imagine the work, the people work here isn't all that different management wise in a school than it might be in a firm of some kind or in some other institution, where like that, the ability to sort of deliver performance each and every year is a function of the leaders, the performers, and the pipeline you have coming in. And I think when looking at this sort of talent set of initiatives, those are present. Like, are we continuing to develop leaders and their skills as managers? Are we continuing to push the skills of our educators? Are we continuing to attract young people into our school and then train them up so they can take over as educators? And then, those are probably the biggest tools here I see in moving that forward. But I agree, and I feel like some of those things are also represented here.
And I also do think that that's a little easier said than done, especially when you're in a smaller school where an entire grade of students may be attached to one teacher. If they're coming in and they're new and they haven't had the proper training, or they're not able to, maybe it's like, what does it look like before they enter the building? What, being proactive about the support that they're going to get. Maybe it needs to be more than a teacher that's a veteran teacher. But yeah, it really is easy for student performance to really be balanced on one teacher if you do have one teacher per grade or even two teachers per grade.
All right. Maybe I want to be. This is a very solid conversation, and I want to honor people's time. Any closing thoughts? We've got a couple of thoughts on next steps here, with regard to how to actualize this and firm it up.
Great. Okay.
Back to you.
And so, Josh, while you have it open, you want to just start with SLC while you have the deck open?
Let's do this. Yeah, we can move to SLC. Let's do it. So I think SLC members chime in, but I think I'm going to focus in on kind of math results. I think that was the other big conversation we had in addition to the conversation on initiatives. So I want to share out some math results. We administered the second test for middle school math using this sort of STAR or Renaissance resource, which is an external testing program. So it allows for us to get external readings or gaugings on how students have progressed over the past 4 months. Since we tested back in September, 3 months, and they again tested in mid-December. So I'm going to talk through this table, but I think the general headlines are that there were some gains made. And so kids on average experience growth, with more of our students moving into the sort of at or above benchmark bin of what STAR puts together with regard to readiness and how kids are being prepared for demonstrating grade level proficiency at the end of a given grade. And so we had 26% of our students demonstrate proficiency or above in the fall, in the 6th grade. In this winter, or in December, we had 35% of our students at that level. So we were up 9 points with regard to more of our kids now showing or demonstrating being at proficiency or above based on this test. In the 7th grade, the trend was similar. We were up 10 points from the fall to the winter. So in the 7th grade, 40% of our students demonstrated a level at or above benchmark on this exam. And then in the 8th grade, where kids scored quite well in the fall at 46%, we had gains of 1 at 47%. So overall, we have more of our students in the winter demonstrating proficiency or above than we had in the fall, which is a good trend. In looking at the other sorts of categories here, most of those students who moved forward were either close to proficient or not at the bottom of our distribution with regard to what they demonstrated in the fall. And so what we're seeing is our kids who engaged in remote learning consistently over the course of the past 3 months seem to be making gains, whereas kids who have struggled with engaging in a remote program or have struggled just with their learning over the past 4 months tended to stay sort of in that range and still be kind of in this category of in need of intervention. And so I think that's consistent with our grades. We're seeing our kids who engage and are with us every day based on the interventions we're putting forth are showing positive movement with regard to their in-school assessments as well as this external assessment. And then we've got about 25% of our kids who are struggling where like that's the effort. Like what's the next move for us as a school in engaging kids in school and in providing the right supports to them so they are successful and moving from far below proficiency to something closer to proficient over time. And so generally speaking, this is good news. I'm trying to get some data right now on what this looks like across the nation. But my hunch is that there's been less growth this year in math at the middle school level than in prior years due to the pandemic and due to schools orchestrating learning in different ways that aren't as effective. The other piece here that isn't present that is of interest to me is in looking at some of our subgroups, our students with disabilities and perhaps whether they've shown the same level of growth as our general school population. And so those are some analyses we'll be running over the course of the coming couple of weeks, in addition to testing our middle school students using STAR in ELA. That happened this past week. We're now getting those results. And then at the high school, that'll be happening next week. So kids at the high school will be testing in ELA and math as well. So next month, we should have a good sense of, for math and for reading, the degree to which our kids are making growth based on this external assessment. Let me pause there. Jake, Dr. Adams, Jeanette, are there any other tidbits that are worth sharing out with the full board tonight that we discussed on Tuesday with regard to this data? Great. Any questions from the team, the full board? I think the last piece here I'll say is like, this is the first time that we've used STAR here. And so this category of at or above benchmark, I don't know the degree to which this aligns with like proficiency of a 3 to 4 on the state exam at the end of the year. If it does directly align, this is a good sign, but I'm kind of cautious of making and drawing that conclusion. So if you're thinking and wondering that, I am too. What's good is that we will be using this tool moving forward. And so we'll have a better sense next year at this time of the degree to which this is directly correlated and a strong predictor of test scores in the spring versus something which is fair but not perfect, which is probably going to be what this is. But over time, we'll also be able to sort of see how we did with 7th grade math in the winter of 2020 versus the winter of 2021 versus 22 versus 23. So I think this data is valuable in giving us confidence and in giving us a read on trends and how we're doing in preparing kids for the next grade. All right, Jim, that's the update from the SLC for this month.
Okay, where do we want to go next? Should we just go to AFC?
We should. Leslie's not going to take part in the call today, so I'll sort of like maybe provide some of the major headlines, and then members of AFC, please chime in with details. And so I think I just referred to the school leader report, and the headlines there on page 2, which are that net income projections are lower than budgeted by about $2,000, and this is mainly due to a couple of things. There's a couple of moving parts here. We've got an enrollment that's slightly lower by about 4 students than our budgeted enrollment, and then we've got slightly fewer students receiving the sorts of SPED services that we anticipated based on prior year experiences. So as a result, revenues are down. We also, because we're working remotely, there are some costs that we're not incurring. And so there are a couple of costs that we didn't incur this past fall that we're seeing now as savings. 2 of those major costs include transportation. We're not offering busing to kids. And so that's typically a cost of about $60,000. And so we're not going to be incurring that cost this year. And at this point, there's some savings. In addition, we have used external substitutes in the past for learning in school. We're not using that resource this year in the same sort of way we're doing coverages internally or asynchronously. And so there's some cost savings there. And so on net, we're approximately on budget, but just under by about $2,000. Beyond that, in going to our dashboard and looking at kind of like some of the health finance indicators we have, all of them are, I believe, in the green this month with regard to our targets. And that includes current ratio, that includes days of cash on hand, total margin, and debt to asset ratio. Mario and Jeanette, Jim, anything to add beyond that very high level overview?
No, I mean, it was high level, and it's also from, I think the latest data was through November, so it's only so useful. So I just wait to see. I think one of the things that Leslie said on the call was that she's going to start flowing through some of the changes that are due to certain programs not getting implemented. I think in January, and it will be helpful to see when that flows through, because as always, the sort of enrollment is driving the revenue side, and sort of need to understand what, if anything, is driving the expense side, given that our cost structure is mostly fixed, but obviously in a pandemic environment, there's some expenses that should go down. So, so we'll, in other words, no, nothing to add.
Great. Back to you, Jim.
Okay, DFC.
Development-wise, I've kind of offered out the latest reporting there. Jake, do you want to take the lead on reporting out on facility updates? And I think we're gonna move into executive session momentarily anyway. But any sort of high-level updates for the team now?
Sure. You want me to do a quick overview of the potential high school buy?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe if you don't mind ending your share screen, I'll share my screen in a second.
Yep.
But just
Co-host.
just for our new board member, just as a background, we have two facilities, middle school and high school. The middle school, we're co-located with the public school, and so we don't have to worry about it. We don't pay any rent. We just get to stay in a nice public building. And the high school, we were turned down for public space, so we had to go out and find private space. We had this whole scramble for a couple of years, and eventually found private space in a high school in Williamsburg, where we have a 35-year lease. We get subsidy from the city, a formula per student, and basically our affiliated Friends Of is the tenant under the lease with the private landlord, and then Friends Of leases to Unity so that we capture a little bit more of the subsidy, in broad strokes. So that, I think we've been pretty happy with that. The building's, in reasonably good shape, all that good stuff. We got lucky in a lot of ways. And the building owner mentioned, they'd be willing to sell, call it for around $18 million. At first we said, okay, that's great. We're not really interested. We don't have $18 million to buy a school building. But as we learned a little bit more about it, there's this opportunity to basically issue tax-exempt bonds through the city, which basically allows us to borrow money, a lot of money, relatively cheaply, so we could sort of borrow the full amount of to buy the school from the private landlord. And we're still working on the exact numbers. We're working with a bank called PNC that they don't issue the bonds, but they help the underwriting process. And they think that they've given us some indicative pricing. And this is what I'll share on the screen. This is probably a little bit more detail than anybody really wants to see. But this column, so these are years on the left, so each row is a year. And this column here represents, what we would spend out of pocket owning versus leasing. So you can see in the early years, we would be out of pocket. In later years, we'd be, we'd be in the black. And based on this pricing, over the entire period of time, it would cost us about $1.7 million. And in present dollars, it's a little less. The shortfall for the first 10 years is about $1.7 million. If you take the net of the positive, the overall delta is about $1.2 million. So we thought, okay, that's sort of interesting enough that it's worth exploring, that there's not a huge economic burden. And at the end of the 35 years, as opposed to having to go, lease more space and be at the whims of the real estate market, we'd own our building. And at that point, we'd own it outright. We'd have completely paid down the bonds. So that's sort of where we are. This is about a 4-ish month process to get from here to actually issuing the bonds and buying the building. There's a few different workflows we need to do that. And then we'll be able to essentially back away up until pretty much the last minute. And the only thing that will be out is the expense of hiring lawyers to help us sort of see us through this process. And so there's not like an official board approval right now, although we might want to, I think, sort of just because it's going to take a fair amount of time and there might start to be a little bit of legal expenditure between now and the next board meeting. We might want to approve that if people are comfortable. But I think it is worth sort of just a discussion on the part of the board of, is this appealing, assuming the economics all sort of work out? I think that if it starts to be an economic burden on the school that we think is not going to be, that it's going to put the school at risk, I think obviously that would disqualify this idea. But assuming that the economics could sort of continue to bear out, what are the other downsides? And so far, the only things that I've been able to identify, or I shouldn't just say different people on different committees have already been a part of this a little bit. But I think there's a lot of effort for the next 4 months for the sort of the leadership team and then a little bit of effort for the next 30 some odd years. And so to the extent that we're determining priorities, at some level, this will take people's time and maybe take us away from our core priority, our core goals. So that's one thing to think about. I'm sorry.
I think there's, I mean, I don't mean to cut you off at all, but I think it's going to involve a different degree of financial discipline. Because you're going to be kind of issuing the bonds on the basis of your performance and financial statements and ratios and everything, and you're going to need to continuously report to the municipal bond market on those metrics. So it's not going to be like, hey, we have like 30 days of cash this month. Oops, we'll just fix it next month type of thing.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the second point, and well said. You know, right now we have this lease obligation. The lease obligation goes to Unity, so it's not like we can just walk away from our real estate anyway. Like if, for example, the city gave us a great high school space, so it's not like we're not currently obligated for a similar financial, you know, monthly payment as what we're talking about here. But I do think, to Marion's point, you know, right now we have a landlord, and as long as we pay the rent, we're basically fine. And even if we're late with the rent a little bit here and there, like it's, you know, the general gist is going to be that, you know, we can stay in our space as long as we're meeting the basic obligations. But I think with the bond, you know, with issuing these bonds, and there's a little bit more, or there's probably a lot more scrutiny and sort of level of organizational commitment that we should probably, you know, bear. That's all I got. And I can go into as much detail as people want on this.
All right, any questions?
Just that's, you know, something minor, but as and when we vote on this or decide to proceed, our real estate colleagues at the firm have agreed to help with whatever aspects of this they can on a pro bono basis. We're running it through the authorization processes at the firm, which should be this week. But, you know, in the past, when we've undertaken new work, even on a pro bono basis, the retention has had to be approved by people on the board other than people affiliated with SMC. So
That's fantastic. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Jeanette.
Yeah.
I mean, I think from the school's perspective, I feel lucky to have people
it's not a hard one, but it's still one you need to think about.
Some experts in-house sort of doing this intriguing work. So I feel lucky.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Okay. ECPC.
I think there were a couple of initiatives that we discussed offline that I don't think we have to bring to the full board tonight. But I think one of the other initiatives I think is positive is to invite members of this team to visit our middle school and high school in the coming month, virtually, of course. And so I'm thinking tentatively next Thursday, the 21st, probably in morning time. It would be no more than an hour. Maybe an hour and a half. We debriefed afterward. And so that's one. And then at the high school, very likely February 10th. And then also being an hour and a half, and probably being a morning event. So I can send calendar invites out to team, but essentially it's kind of like this, and you would be able to not just be a fly on the wall, but you could be that if that's what you want. But you'd take part in a walkthrough with members of the school leadership team and visiting a few classrooms, and then seeing that team discuss what they have observed and what they want to do next based on what they've observed. So I think you'll find it interesting.
Great. All right. Thank you. Anybody from the associate board? Okay.
Now, I mentioned the good work that's going on there with some of the sort of setting up of small dose campaigning we're going to be doing.
Right. Okay. Minutes from the prior meeting. Has everybody had a chance to review, and are there any comments? Okay, so all in favor of approving? Great, thank you. And then bond counsel. So Jake and Marion.
Sorry, I took the liberty of putting your names down next to this item.
Oh, that's fine. Jake, do you want to go over it?
Sure. So there's at least a few lawyers involved in this. There's essentially, so New York City has this authority called Build NYC. It's like an agency that just sort of does the official issuance in order to make it so the bonds are tax exempt, which brings down our interest cost. Anyway, so we pay for their counsel, Build NYC's counsel. That's called bond counsel. It's according to a statute. There's like it's not, a typical hourly arrangement. It's based on the size of the bond offering. There's a set amount. And then we'll also pay for our own counsel. And then the underwriter will have counsel. I don't think we probably do. Part of the bond issuance will be the underwriter's counsel. And so anyway, that'll get baked into the loan. We don't have to worry about that quite yet. I think our thought was, in general, we're supposed to get anything over $20,000 approved by the board. And I don't think we're going to incur much more than $20,000 of legal fees between now and our next board meeting, but we might start to engage counsel to look through this. And so it'd be just good practice to get the board's opinion or approval that we begin this exploration. We don't have a particular firm to recommend yet.
Maybe Marion or Jeanette, what would be the best way of, what would be the best thing to approve at this meeting, if anything at all?
I'm debating. Sorry. I'm almost inclined to say nothing yet. And Jake, just cut me off right away if you don't agree. I think if we this is probably one where we don't have an estimate yet. I think from the firms we've talked about, but you're probably talking about 6 figures of legal fees that go with the issuance. And I think we may. There's 2 paths, right? Either the board decides to delegate to 3 or 4 of us the decision to hire somebody up to X dollars, or we come back to an executive committee. I think we could do one of these 2 things.
What do you think about the idea of the board sort of approving the initial sort of the concept of this and the initial sort of investigation and sort of incidental expenses related to that up to 20,000?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Knowing that it's not like we're going to agree to a contract with a firm that's going to require us to go over 20,000. Just over time, it's going to. So we can always back out of anything basically by the next board meeting.
Yeah, and if it turns out we got to put our name at the bottom of a page with an estimate that says $100,000 or whatever, we'll just let this group know.
Okay. So nothing to approve there. Okay, public comment. Do we have anybody on? Looks like no. Okay, last thoughts. I really don't have. I think we got a lot done, especially on the strategic side. Josh,
do we want to take a vote on the council point then?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we were going to pass on it. I missed that part. But yeah, we can. So what is the official ask on the bond side?
Go ahead, Jake. I think that was your last formulation that won the day.
I would say, permission to investigate I don't know if it's exactly right. It's a purchase of real estate and incidental expenses related there too. I guess not to exceed
Yeah.
$20,000.
Do we want to talk about the architects here?
No, I think we can hold on that.
Okay.
I received the response from David Briggs about expiration stuff, so I want to look at that before we maybe circle back to it.
Okay. All right. Okay. All in favor? Let whoever it is at S&C do the wordsmithing. Good. Okay. Last thoughts. Sorry, my screen is buggy. Last thoughts. No, so thanks everybody for attending. I think it's a productive meeting. I think, Josh, on this strategic planning stuff, what do you want to do there? Do you have some stuff to think about for the next meeting, or
Yeah, I don't want to overpromise, and so I think I've got some good feedback today. And I'm better at this stuff when I've got some time to kind of like not think about the daily workings of the school. I guess that happens in February next, unless something comes up. So I think it may be a March meeting when there's sort of a next step here. I want to give this some thought, and I want to chat with Josh Phillips about this stuff. He's pretty good at this stuff and has some experiences. So that's my immediate next step, without kind of promising a deliverable coming forward. But I'm more excited than anyone else to move this forward. So it will happen. I think just for February, we're moving into a busy time. And so in the next meeting, you can expect some updates with regard to staffing, both the retention of staff and some predictions there, as well as budget-wise, what we're looking to do with staffing in 21-22. You'll have some more STAR results that we can talk through. And then I imagine, there's a lot going on right now. On Sunday, I was getting emails about vaccination sort of protocols and next steps from the state, from the city, et cetera. And so there's a lot of movement right now. So people are getting vaccinated and educators can do so. So that's happening. And so I want to see more about how that kind of plays out, but that will influence our planning in the near term over the course of the coming months. So
anyone working in a school, right, basically is eligible right now in New York?
I think, it's pretty, I know of some folks who work as adjunct professors at community colleges and they're getting vaccinated. I think it's, if you work somewhere in the education realm, you can make a case. I think there's not like a hard, sorry, you're not eligible sort of move right now. That's
good.
I'm sure there are charter school board members getting vaccinated.
Yeah. What about me?
I bet there are. If you that I'm visiting the school once a week, and so therefore I should make sure that everyone's safe around me. You'd probably be okay.
I find it hard to believe they would sort of elevate the educators with everybody working from home to that kind of level if they weren't thinking getting vaccinated and getting back in the class immediately. Is that kind of what you're hearing?
Yeah, I think.
Otherwise, why do it?
I think part of it is herd immunity too. I think they're trying to vaccinate, without creating immediate chaos. I think they're trying to vaccinate as many people as possible right now. Yeah.
So I've been in contact with other school leaders and know about how other schools are kind of positioning themselves, and so I'm kind of reading those cues as we make decisions for our school too. And it's very much just in process right now. So
I think at a minimum, you can encourage people as a first step, right? Yeah, just make sure everybody knows that they're eligible and here is how they can sign up. And then if you need to step it up, you can do that.
That's exactly what we did on Monday afternoon and Tuesday morning at our two staff meetings.
Great. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Chris is on. Chris, can you turn off the record?
Thanks,
Chris.